The JGMaker ArtistD Pro is not the first large format IDEX value price 3D printer that I've used. It is in fact the fourth one. And with the JGMaker ArtistD Pro, my experience with these printers has almost literally come full circle, because the first one of these that I used was the JGMaker ArtistD Not Pro. And that was one that was sent to me before the Kickstarter came out. So everything that I saw in it, everything that I had a problem with, I had to put a little caveat next to and say, this may be different when you get it for the Kickstarter. And then came the JGMaker ArtistD Pro. Now this is the one with the improved user interface. And this is the one that is post Kickstarter, which means any of those things that I saw in the pre-Kickstarter one and said maybe these will be changed, I can now say for sure they weren't. First of all, when I got this machine, well, I had the bed leveling problem to deal with. See, in the Kickstarter machine, they decided that because this bed was so huge that the right solution to this would be to add a fifth leveling point, a fixed peg in the middle that you had to level to. Now, what I don't remember on the pre-Kickstarter version, but that this one has, is a little screw that you can use to adjust where exactly the Z-axis will hit its limit switch. And what you're supposed to do, the way this is supposed to work, is you move the head to the middle and you level it over and over again with a very precise measuring tool to make sure that you're getting the right spot in the middle. And once you've got the middle set up, then you go about your 4-point leveling the sides. Theoretically, that's the way it's supposed to work. The problem with this is that I don't level with a tool. I don't trust any measurement tool whatsoever. I use a piece of paper, and then what you do is you start a 3D print. You start a 3D print that you push out to the edges as far as you can go, and that 3D print tells you as it's going around, oh, that's too squishy, I better tighten the screw and bring the plate down. That one's not sticking well enough, so bring it up, and just bring it around and around and around. Use the 3D printer to make sure that your 3D printer is level. It's the best way to do it. But with this kind of 5-point leveling system, you can't test the middle to make sure it's good until you finish leveling the whole thing. And if it's off, you're back to square one doing it again. I pulled off the magnetic build plate. I cut a hole in the magnet in the middle, and I removed that middle peg so that that middle would be free and I would be back to regular 4-point leveling. And as soon as I did that, I was able to get a good level a lot faster. But I was running into another problem. This bed seemed to be going out of level mid-print, mid-layer. I could not get a good level on this. And I noticed that the build plate was real wiggly, like it just would not hold still. Now, normally to fix that, there are these eccentric screws that you tighten down, but I had those screws dialed in as tight as possible. And as I looked closer, I realized something. I realized that the wheels on the Y-axis were worn out. And I've never seen that before. Now, I'm trying to figure out, why would JGMaker send me a 3D printer with worn out parts? Like, how would that even happen? Somebody broke this somehow. They wore out those wheels, and instead of trying to fix it themselves and figure out what was wrong with it, they said, we'll send it to that 3D printing professor guy. I'll bet he can fix it. And while I really appreciate getting this 3D printer, I'm not sure that that's the best way to handle customer service in the general sense. However, I was able to fix it. I was able to take off the build plate, replace those wheels, got this thing up and running. And once I did that, once the plate was stable, I was able to get a good level because I got rid of that middle screw. All of a sudden, I was getting really good prints out of this thing. Now, a couple of small things to complain about, I guess. The touchscreen interface, while it is a huge step up from the version that doesn't have a touchscreen interface, this screen really requires you to push hard to get to those buttons. There's no accidental pushing on this thing. It's not a touchscreen interface. It's more like a punch screen. Also, why brag about having quiet stepper motors if you're going to take your 3D printer and put inside of it the loudest case fan you can possibly find? It's like a jet turbine. I don't get it. The stepper motors are fairly quiet though, and this machine, yes, while it has a constant sibilance to it, at least that sibilance doesn't include the singing noise of a stepper driver. Wait, what am I saying? I used to love that noise. Why are we getting rid of that? Oh well. Also, this machine has filament run out sensors on both of the filament feeds, and that's great. Except that it's not smart enough to look at the G code and go, oh, I'm only using the one filament. I don't need to check the other one. No, it checks them both, which means get used to having a little piece of spare filament in the filament sensor that you're not using if you're 3D printing with only one filament at a time. You know, it kind of illustrates the point that in a lot of ways, G code and Cura and our current crop of slicers isn't ready for IDEX. There are problems that IDEX creates that G code as it is doesn't solve. Things like having different modes. Now, with the FlashForge Creator Max 2, in the slicer, they put certain codes to say, hey, do this one in dual mode, do this one in mirror mode, do this one in single color mode. This doesn't have that option because regular G code doesn't have those flags, not without getting real strange with it. And of course, FlashForge, they're not using G code. Well, they're using G code inside another file format, but that other file format can have those fancy flags on it that they want. This doesn't have that because we're sticking to the open source model, and the open source model hasn't sorted that out yet. It's frustrating, it's weird, and yet I can't deny that at the end of the day, yeah, it does indeed work. But more than work, the fact that it's Cura, the fact that it's direct drive, I was putting this head to head against the X40 and it doesn't just work, it's good. And I was actually using this 3D printer to do cool things with. I tested a couple of printer blocks and was so impressed with the results that I used it to help develop a new set of printer blocks that I will be releasing to the public in the future, but a flying ship printer block that I think looks pretty darn cool. Of course, it's IDEX, so I needed to calibrate the two heads to make sure that their offsets were perfectly aligned, which meant that I had to do test print after test print after test print after test print, adjusting the values, changing things a little bit at a time, test print, so many test prints. Oh, and I had got the settings wrong. I was using the wrong slicer settings in Cura. The right slicer settings, you have to go to their website, download a 3MF file. Oh, you need to have different 3MF files if you're printing in PLA or if you're printing in PETG or if you're printing in anything else, because those slicer settings, they are super well defined for that material and for this machine. But if you decide to just change the material in Cura, Cura's going to go, hey, what about all the rest of these settings? Should I change them too? You know, some of those are temperature settings, some of those are retraction settings. You can't pick and choose in Cura, and so you have to go back to their 3MF file to properly configure it for the material. And before I learned that, I was actually just using the X40 profile in Cura. Yeah, the X40 has a profile, the ArtistD does not. And of course, between those two profiles, the offsets for the X and Y axis are different. So once I learned how to properly set up Cura for it, I had to redo my test prints and my test prints and my test, because it was all off. But eventually I got that dialed in and I was able to get dual material prints that, yes, once again, because it's IDEX, it means that it's clean and it's beautiful and it's out of this world. While you're checking out this cool thing posted by one of you on the What You Making channel on my Discord, why don't you open up the cards and see what deep dive into the topics of this video you can do. Man, this is really cool. Yeah, I really enjoy it when people connect with me on social media. That's why I've got links to all the socials in the description, and I hope you'll check them out. I've also got a Patreon, which you can check out here, and I'll tell you a little secret about the suggested videos. This is the one that YouTube thinks that you'll like. This is the one, though, that I think you'll like. Which one of us is right? Only one way to know for sure. Gotta watch them both. And remember, safety first, because I really do care about you, and I'll see you next time.